a look at the Incredible Hulk, plus real scientists taking the form of superheroes, and one old economist who might be a supervillain. It's all up next on Science Goes to the Movies. Welcome to Science Goes to the Movies, a look at the stories of science and how they change our culture. I'm Lisa Beth Kovetz, and I'm delighted to welcome back to the show Professor Sebastian Alvarado of the City University of New York to talk about his book, The Science of Marvel. Hello again.
I'm happy to be here again.
In the movies, the story goes that General Thaddeus Ross lied to his daughter, scientist Dr. Betty Ross, convincing her to work on a top-secret radiation-resistant serum. Her partner, Dr. Bruce Banner, so believed in the work they were doing that he tried the super soldier serum on himself. Add gamma radiation, and suddenly, the Incredible Hulk. Dr. Banner's DNA is significantly damaged, torn apart at the helix in a double-stranded break. So what is a DNA helix, and can we break our genes?
Yes, you can. It's not a good idea, but you can, when you look at the structure of DNA, there's something that we're all very familiar with. It's that double helix that looks very pretty and has all these kind of nice aesthetics. You see it in all the science fiction movies.
So that ladder is called the double helix, that ladder that we see, the twisted ladder.
Yes, so you have, the backbone is made from phosphate backbone, and you have different types of chemicals, purine and pyridines, and ribose sugars that kind of make those rungs along the ladder that kind of twists and turns. And what happens is that gamma radiation, it creates a lot of ionizing radiation, which kind of takes the water and the oxygen in the vicinity and turns it into oxygen radicals. And these are kind of very reactive species of oxygen that have the ability to attack pretty much anything that's around them. So in the case of gamma radiation, its effects on DNA, it will cause these double-stranded breaks. So that ladder will just cut in half, and it does that throughout the entire genome. Your genome and all the genes that make up you in a given cell is a very large amount of information, and imagine all of that going into a blender and then getting put back together.
You and your wife advise science fiction writers about how to really integrate real science into their work. Would you give the Marvel writers an A+ for their gamma radiation and the double-stranded helix break?
Well, I think it's at the end of the day, it's always about fun first, I guess. It's the rule of cool. And I think for that, they definitely get the A+. I mean, it's sometimes fun to learn about science while you're watching a MCU movie, but it's not the #1 thing. So, I mean, I think it's fun that they make an excellent effort of trying to showcase aspects of different science that could be real or plausible. And for that, I really do enjoy it. I mean, I think, and everyone else does too, so.
In the Marvel Universe, Bruce Banner's decimated genes reassemble into the Incredible Hulk. Okay, so never mind becoming a superhero. What's the chance that a double-stranded helix break would end up in anything that's capable of life?
Well, I think that's a bit more up to chance, especially in this specific scenario, because every single cell in your body more or less has a copy of that genome, right? And if it gets broken, it has to reassemble in a unique way that would not only give you the power of the Incredible Hulk, but would be pretty consistent from cells in your foot, as cells in your eyes, as cells in your brain, and everywhere else. More often than not, that would lead to a lot of bad things happening to you. It's something that does happen, but often during disease states. There are some examples, I think, in lupus, but also during cancer, where a lot of parts of your genome kind of shatter and reassemble, and different parts of chromosomes kind of get glued and copy and pasted together in a very inconsistent way, often leading to a disease state, but hardly ever an Incredible Hulk.
Well, so in real life, genes do really shatter and reassemble?
Yeah, depending on the types of things, for example, gamma radiation or other stressful things that can happen to a given cell. All kinds of things can break them apart. Even some machinery that we actually have in our cells as well. They cut, or they also repair the DNA when it gets damaged.
There was a lovely segment in your book where you described DNA as the dancer's ribbon, the ribbon dancer from the Olympics.
Yes.
So amazing. What's happening in our body that's like a DNA ribbon dancer?
So it wasn't so much the DNA itself, but it was the protein. So proteins are made up of strings of amino acids, and the way that they come together to form these three-dimensional structures is often by forming these little helixes around one another, or these beta-pleated sheets. So I made the analogy between that and like a gymnast ribbon. So basically, with every flick of the wrist, you see these folds kind of being introduced in the protein, and the way they all come together is what ultimately allows the protein to have a specific function. Now, in the case of the effects of gamma radiation on those proteins, that's like kind of running in there while that ribbon is kind of suspended in the air and going with scissors and cutting everything up into pieces. Or gluing certain pieces together and maybe spraying it with some glue that kind of sticks everything together. With those really dramatic changes, you're really destroying the integrity of the protein and its ability to do a specific job.
And that's how and the chance of reassembling into a superhero.
I don't know. So that's definitely up to a lot of chance. I think that was something particularly special and unique to the Hulk, because when you think about the Hulk, you also think about the opposite of the Hulk, which is the Abomination, right? And he was kind of where everything had gone wrong. And it makes perfect sense when you can think of the zillions of ways in which something like that can go wrong. The idea here is that within every single one of the 37 trillion cells that make up the Incredible Hulk, or possibly more than that, this very, very large genome was cut into the exact right pieces to make the Incredible Hulk, and not, let's say, a dead corpse.
Right.
And then reassembled 37 trillion times in every single cell in the body in the exact same way, so that way this person could not only become the Hulk, but turn it off and turn it on when he needed to. So, luck.
Luck.
Yeah.
Luck. The original Incredible Hulk, created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby back in 1962, was not green. He was gray. And in the comics, sometimes he was blue. But after the 1977 Bill Bixby Lou Ferrigno TV series, the Hulk was pretty much always green. And we know there are living creatures in real life that change their colors as camouflage, but what about aggression? Does any creature in the planet actually Hulk out?
Definitely. I mean, I'm really excited about this because I actually have a model system in my lab that changes its color, and we've been able to tie it to different aggressive behaviors and reproductive behaviors. This is specifically within a fish, actually.
Wait, you have a model system of a fish?
Yeah, so I study cichlid fish, and they're very interesting because they remind me quite a bit of the Incredible Hulk. They have interesting social systems where dominant males are super aggressive. They become brightly yellow colored, maybe not green, but brightly yellow colored. They have this black eye bar underneath their eye. They get to hold territory, they get to reproduce, and they're very, very aggressive. And on the other hand, you also have the subordinate males, which are very meek, timid, they hide for the most part, and they get bullied around quite a bit. So it's kind of like the difference between Bruce Banner and the Incredible Hulk. And they can go back and forth, and that's a really interesting thing about their brains and how they behave. They can transition between a dominant and a subordinate depending on the social environment. So for me, I like to think of that animal as maybe not one that's always changing color. There are changes in color, but really when it comes down to the behavior, you do see that transformation. In addition to this, our lab specifically looks at how they change colors as well. Males can exist either as blue or yellows, and the yellow version of the fish is very aggressive, and they often win in fights against blues. And the blues are more, I guess, lovers, not fighters. They spend a lot more of their time doing reproductively oriented behaviors. So for me, it's kind of like I get to do my own little mini Hulk and Bruce Banner experiment in the lab. I don't write that in my grants, but it's definitely how I feel about the work. It makes me a lot more excited to come into work.
Well, so how come fish got this extraordinary talent and humans didn't?
Oh, that's actually a really interesting story. So, I mean, a lot of fish and insects and birds actually have been able to collect a lot of different changes in color, or at least a lot of different colors. Humans and most mammals, we actually only have we have melanocytes. These are the dark pigment-containing cells that kind of give us darker or lighter skin. I think I mean, my guess would have something to do with our evolutionary history. A lot of our ancestors had to live in the dark, and they were nocturnal, so they didn't really actually get a chance to be exposed to brightly lit situations. So when it comes to fish and lizards and birds, they all had, many millions of years ahead of us to kind of get exposed to the different, the breadth of the spectrum of light that's out there. And then we kind of just had the one type of cell that allowed us to become darker or lighter.
Because we got into the sun later?
We got into the sun later in our evolutionary history. Fish, birds, lizards, reptilians, all of them, they had a lot more. And it actually kind of, you'll see it, that these animals also are able to see light in a much more broader spectrum than humans can, or at least other mammals can. Of course, there are always exceptions, but it's kind of a neat story because you've been around longer enough, you get to be all these cool colors, or at least see in all these really neat areas of the visible spectrum. And if you didn't, if you came late to the party, well, you have to wait maybe a little bit longer.
Aww.
Yeah.
In the Marvel storyline, Bruce Banner's research revolved around exposing myosin proteins to gamma radiation. Now, that's a fabulous combination of words for any writer to come up with. But we looked up myosin proteins and learned from Wikipedia that they are a superfamily of motor proteins best known for their roles in muscle contraction. So what do you think? Do you think the writers were dropping a little science Easter egg in there by making Bruce Banner's research in muscle contraction?
I definitely think so. I mean, I think they were really having fun with what would come up for that kind of work. And in fact, there has been a lot of work looking at the effects of radiation on protein structure and how they fold and how they work. So it really, I mean, it seems like something you would find in the journals, something you would find as cited work, and it's a nice nod to the work of many other scientists doing this type of thing.
Exposure to gamma radiation rendered Banner's dose of super soldier serum unstable, and poor Dr. Bruce Banner became the angriest Avenger ever. When Bruce Banner gets angry, what happens in his brain?
Oh, that's fun. So that was something.
Well, not for him.
Maybe not for him. I guess it depends on the situation. I would imagine, and I got to imagine, at least for the book, there are certain parts of your brain that are responsible for different types of functions, right? You have the prefrontal cortex, the cortices of your brain that allows you to plan ahead, to execute higher cognitive function, to think about something before you do it. And I would assume that in the case of the Hulk, this is a part of the brain that might be shrinking, or it might not be as well connected to other parts of the brain that are responsible for, thoughtful thinking, as opposed to other parts of the brain which might be more active in let's say, the amygdala and the limbic system that are probably reacting in a very unique way to be more aggressive and things like that. In addition to this, there are probably disconnects from parts of the brain that process speech. We all kind of know that in those first few movies, the Hulk was very Hulk smash, puny human, or things like that. He didn't really talk, or when he did, he talked with the vocabulary of a 5-year-old. And for those reasons, you kind of could imagine, because he's going back and forth from somebody who's a scientist and very articulate and knows how to speak to someone who isn't, there's probably a loss of connection between the parts of the brains that process those things. Those processes are often mediated through circuits that are made from neurons and the way that they connect to each other through synapses. And when you go at the cellular level, each of these neurons has a collection of instructions in their DNA that makes the proteins that either strengthen or weaken those synapses. So in this case, you could imagine a variety of changes happening at the cellular level that are either strengthening or weakening those connections as they are breaking or being formed.
What do you think of Smart Hulk? Have you seen Smart Hulk?
Yeah, the new one from Avengers. He finds he masters his habits and how he feels about these things. I suppose that's kind of really finding the trade-off point, because even then he's not as big as the original Hulk too. Yeah. So it's the intelligent scientist Hulk.
Why not? Well, I mean, we talk a lot about how we see scientists, and why can't you be big and hulky and also quite
I'm
smart.
working on it. Yeah. No, I think I agree. I think I mean, yeah, it's a great idea. I think the one thing they do need to work on though is the fact that only one or two people can do everything. Right? Because you've got like Bruce Banner and Tony Stark, or Tony Stark by himself does everything, right? Although I digress. Maybe I'm just kind of, I'm complaining about the amount of work it takes me and my team of people to just do one thing. And I might be jealous of all the stuff they get to do, so.
Well, a lot of our ideas of people and a lot of our ideas of science come from movies, and a lot of our ideas about a lot of things come from the stories we tell each other. So I think it is important to say that, to say what's real and what's just not possible. As you read Dr. Alvarado's excellent book, The Science of Marvel, something called DNA methylation pops up in chapters on very disparate subjects like cryostasis, immortality, and giant ants. So what new super cool power is this?
So there might be a bit of a bias towards DNA methylation because that's a lot of what we study in the lab, and the work that I've been doing for the last decade or so, and probably the work I'll be doing for the next few decades. It's really neat to kind of go back to because it really looks at this whole phenomenon, which is kind of the study of epigenetics. So the way genes, I guess, respond to their environment and the dialogue between the environment and genes to determine how they get turned on and when and where they get turned on. So this is something that allows you to kind of study lots of different topics because every cell needs to use the instructions it has very differently depending on the situation. If you were to just take any single cell in your body right now, the 37 trillion cells that make you up, one cell in your eye is doing a very different job than another cell in your foot, despite having the exact same genetic information. And one of the ways in which that information is used differently is the way parts of your genome become methylated or demethylated. And what's really interesting is that this process is very reversible and it's dynamic. So depending on the kind of environment you're exposing yourself to, you can turn on the right genes and the wrong genes, or turn on the right genes and turn off the wrong genes to allow a specific cell to assume the traits that allow it to adapt to a new environment. So whether you're looking at cryostasis, obviously cells are going to respond to cryostasis in a very unique way. Behavior as well. So it comes up rather often because of that. And it often finds its way creeping into the consulting work that we do too.
Why is it creeping into your consulting work?
Oh, because everybody wants to make some sort of genetic mutant that does X, Y, or Z, or that's been exposed to this and now causes that. And, you know, it's something where you can almost ignore what we know about, well, you wouldn't ignore what we know about genetics, but you can kind of build on what we already have. We can build on our expectations of how genes work.
Let me just clarify, the people looking to make mutants are the writers that you work with, not the students at Queen's College.
No, not the students at Queen's College. The writers that we work with, the people who are making the movies, the comic books, and things like that. But it's something, and then it's just an exciting field for me. So I try my best to kind of transfer my excitement for the work that I do in the lab in a real, sometimes preclinical setting, sometimes, organismal setting. I'd like to kind of share that work, and it's something that I can at least say for sure I know what I'm talking about. I hope so, at least.
Let's talk about the Thanos snap.
Yes.
At the end of Infinity Wars, the villain is Thanos, who failed to take into account Robert Solo's Nobel Prize-winning exogenous growth theory, thinks he's doing the right thing when he rids the universe of one half of all its people with a snap of his fingers. And people are really bummed out that half the lives in the universe were gone, but the writers didn't really dig into what that would mean for the end of the world. But you did.
Yeah.
What would happen if 50% of the population...
That's a bummer.
Yeah.
Yeah. No.
Well,
yeah, it's. I think I just kind of took it step by step in terms of what would happen in the first week, what would happen in the next month, and across years. I think they did a fun job of it in an Endgame, where they basically kind of had therapy groups and things like that to kind of deal with the social implications of losing so many people. I think I made the assumption that it wasn't just half of the humans on Earth, but really half of everything, right?
I think that's what it was.
Yeah, yeah. So for that to happen, it's pretty dramatic change. I think at least, when you think about these very dense urban areas like, New York, among other big urban areas, chances are you would lose a lot of very important people who are part, for the infrastructure. You'd have kind of the second wave of death that would happen because, hospitals wouldn't be populated with staff that need to help people and things like that, or just kind of when you think of the organization of a city and its infrastructure and what keeps it moving, there would be tremendous loss. There would be a second wave pretty much of misfortune.
We feel, particularly in New York, where it's so crowded all the time,
Yeah.
that it's so crowded, but all those people are doing something significant.
Yeah, they've
each
got
and
a
every
job
one of
and-
them.
Yeah, definitely. And that's something that would have a tremendous effect on how we live our life. I would guess in more rural areas, people who know how to kind of take care of themselves and who are more disconnected from, I guess, their Amazon Prime and things like that, they would do all right. I think I cracked a joke about how Mennonites would do very well. Not that they're watching this. But if they could deal well independently, they would be able to
Right.
to make something of it. And then the other thing I guess I kind of commented on was kind of the effects on various ecosystems. So humans were doing a pretty terrible job of overfishing many parts of the ocean, and if all of a sudden we are halved, and probably more than halved, because chances are there will be so many other issues that we'll be dealing with. I mean, that could cause humongous growths in certain stock populations of fish. That could disrupt all kinds of food webs. It can cause ecosystem collapses. I mean, if you had to look at everything right now is in this very specific balance, right? And disrupting half of that is going to do a lot of things that will have cascading effects that will kind of resonate throughout all of life on Earth.
And what if we don't disappear in puffs of smoke? What if we leave corpses of half the living things?
Then you've got a lot of corpses on your head. I mean, I could imagine that the things will get very unclean very quickly.
Right.
Very dirty. Probably more disease would spread, leading to another third wave, who knows, of death. So I mean, that's just
Thanos did not think it through.
Did not think that far. Yeah.
The Marvel character Thanos was created by artist-writer Jim Starlin and made his first appearance in 1973. In Infinity Wars, he was played brilliantly by Josh Brolin, but Thanos was just copying an earlier villain, one with the appropriately villainous name Malthus, who said that any attempt to relieve the suffering of starving children through charity or welfare would be useless, and such generosity would only encourage the very forms of behavior that lead people to be poor. But unlike Thanos of Marvel fame, Robert Malthus was a real person and a member of the English clergy, and the starving children denied relief based on his theories lived and died in Ireland, where nearly a quarter of the population starved to death or fled the island in the Great Famine, which lasted from 1845 to 1849. You write in your book that Malthus and Thanos see the problems of pollution and overpopulation, and all they can think of is random murder. What about technology?
Yeah, no, I think there was that was a big oversight, and it wasn't necessarily was it Malthus's. He wasn't so much of the villain as the people who saw his ideas and then took them and put them into implementation, saying, well, with overpopulation, wages will decrease. With the decreased wages, people will make less money, and you'll have this cycle of misery, and everyone's going to be unhappy. So let's use, the Irish as an example. I think that was what happened, and it was terrible because, it was almost kind of using this quote unquote logical thinking to justify a lot of death and misfortune. And it wasn't necessarily considering how humans could be very innovative in going through things like the agricultural revolution, or at least innovating new ways of handling the earth. They didn't take into account the fact that we would figure out ways of making genetically modified organisms, or the way we would figure out ways of making, super crops, ones that could be farmed in a variety of different areas, and none of that was taken into account. And we're still on that path, right? We like to think our way out of certain problems as a population. In a species. And for those reasons, I mean, if you don't take that into account, there are a lot of ways in which life has improved significantly since Malthus's times. In fact, I would say even
Astronomically.
Yeah, I mean, like the number of people dying of starvation is significantly less than back then too, right? And we have a much larger population.
The amount of food we get out of a plot of land is gigantic.
Yeah, and it's not that we're home free, right? We're still trying to figure out those innovative ways of sustaining our huge population on Earth, but it's definitely something that's, I think, worth giving a chance as opposed to snapping away into non-existence.
It's interesting you say that Malthus had this idea, but he didn't implement it. So if Malthus was a movie trope, then he would be the scientist who had the idea, and then the British militarized it, militarized his concept.
Yeah, I think he was very open with his writings and getting it out there and having a lot of people read it. And I mean, it had both positive and negative impacts. It wasn't just, I guess, the British parliamentary using it to starve Irish people, but it was also used, I mean, I think Darwin took some of his ideas and implemented into his Origin of the Species, and it's had a tremendous effect on population genetics and our understanding of populations in general. So it's not that he was completely wrong, it's just that he was missing, it was only part of the picture. People have a habit of, or humans have a habit of making a decision that could affect maybe more people than they intend to, with only part of the picture. And I guess there's this very nice balance between scientists who are trying to learn as much as they can of the world around them, and propose theories about how it works, and I guess people who are implementing policy and getting things to work. So they have to take with, there has to be balance between the two. And I guess, we can think about that a lot today, more than ever.
We are tragically out of time. Thank you so much for spending time with us.
It's my pleasure.